All right, guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, here it's jerninghgam. Here we're going to be listening to the Sky News and see how worrying this new variant is in the UK. Delta variant, Napoleon variant. We're going to see now and see how bad it is now. If it's going to be a delay on the lockdowns on June 22nd, 23rd, or something. So Sky News.
Good evening from Adam and me. Welcome to the News Hour. First tonight, Public Health England has warned that the Delta variant of COVID-19 is up to 64% more transmissible indoors than the Kent variant and is more resistant to vaccines. The variant that was first identified in India is now by far the most dominant in the UK, with cases having more than trebled in a week. That spike in cases has pushed England's R number, the rate at which the virus spreads, to its highest since January. And this all adds yet more doubt to whether remaining COVID restrictions in England will end on June the 21st, a decision the government will announce on Monday. And in the past hour, the British Medical Association has called for a delay. So let's look at the figures then. There were 29,892 new cases of the Delta variant identified in the last week. That means a total of 42,323 cases of the variant have now been reported. More than 90% of all new COVID cases reported in the UK are now the Delta variant. And the latest risk assessment suggests vaccines are 17% less effective after one dose compared to the Kent variant. Let's join Emma Birchley, our correspondent in the newsroom. So really, with all these figures coming out today, things don't look encouraging, do they, at all, for June the 21st?
No, take a look at the R number and you'll see just how things are progressing, because in the past week, that number has increased to between 1.2 and 1.4. So the last time that it was that high was in the beginning of January. It's jumped from between 1 and 1.2 last week. And what that means is that for every 10 people who get coronavirus, they'll pass it on to between 12 and 14 people. That R number needs to be below 1 for the pandemic to shrink, and clearly we're a long way from that. Things moving in the wrong direction. And we know, of course, that now is very different to back in January. That was when the vaccination programme was starting. Now we have more than 3/4 of people having received the first dose, and more than half have had 2 doses of the jab. And when you look at the number of people who are in A&E with the Delta variant last week, this is from Office for National Statistic figures, you'll see that actually only 7% of those had had both jabs. So it's clearly working, but there are a lot of people still to have their injections. And there's a lot for the government to consider this weekend when they're looking at how they're going to proceed when it comes to this June the 21st date, when we should have been reaching the 4th stage of the roadmap out of lockdown, an announcement due to be made on Monday. And now we've heard from the British Medical Association, who said that what is needed is a sensible delay to that. They say that there is a huge risk that prematurely relaxing all restrictions will undo the excellent work of the vaccine programme and lead to a surge of infections. Dr. Charnagpal goes on, the current data and evidence shows that ending restrictions in just over a week would not meet the government's own 4 tests, and it's vital that the Prime Minister honours his own commitment to the population on how to safeguard the health of the nation. Those 4 tests, you may remember, included making sure there hadn't been a surge in cases and that all variants of concern were under control, and clearly at the moment that doesn't seem to be the case. So plenty for the government to consider at the moment. And what the BMA are actually saying is that this is a situation that should be reviewed every 2 weeks. But the BMA today joining with so many other scientists saying June the 21st is simply too soon.
See what happens. Thanks a lot for now. Let's bring you up to date with the latest daily data released by the government this afternoon. There have been 8,125 new coronavirus cases, the highest daily total since the end of February, and 17 deaths have been reported. That means the total number of people who have died within 28 days of a positive test now stands at 127,884. Meanwhile, another 201,607 people have received their first vaccination, and 308,038 people have had their second. In total, over 70 million vaccines have now been given to people in the UK.
Well, good afternoon from Cornwall, where the G7 summit is officially underway. The leaders of the 7 industrialised nations making up the group gathered on the beach in Cardiff Bay for the official photograph, which marks the start of the weekend's talks. And then it was time to get down to work. Climate change is firmly on the agenda, and there's growing pressure for them to do more to protect the rest of the world from COVID-19. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has already pledged to send 100 million doses of COVID vaccines to some of the world's poorest countries. The American President, Joe Biden, has pledged 500 million doses, and it's hoped that other G7 leaders will make similar pledges over the weekend. At the start of the first roundtable session this afternoon, Boris Johnson stressed the need to rebuild economies as a result of damage as a result of the global pandemic.
We need to make sure that we learn the lessons from the pandemic. We need to make sure that we don't repeat some of the errors that we doubtless made in the course of the last 18 months or so. And we need to make sure that we now allow our economies to recover. And I think that they have the potential to bounce back very strongly, and there's all sorts of reasons for being optimistic. But it is vital that we don't repeat the mistake of the last great crisis, the last great economic recession in 2008, when the recovery was not uniform across all parts of society. And I think what's gone wrong with this pandemic, or what risks being a lasting scar, is that I think the inequalities may be entrenched. And we need to make sure that as we recover, we level up across our societies and we build back better. And I actually think that we have a huge opportunity to do that, because as G7, we are united in our vision for a cleaner, greener world, a solution to the problems of climate change. And in those ideas, in those technologies, in which we're all addressing together, I think there is the potential to generate many, many millions of high-wage, high-skill jobs. And I think that is what the people of our countries now want us to focus on. They want us to be sure that we're beating the pandemic together and discussing how we'll never have a repeat of what we've seen, but also that we're building back better together.
Well, we can bring in our diplomatic editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's following the summit. He's in Falmouth here in Cornwall. And Dominic, lofty ambitions laid out in general terms by the Prime Minister there. What do we know? Are they progressing towards fulfilling them?
Well, they say they're making progress towards a final communique. It's pretty remarkable. If you look at that table, that round table of leaders, they have an awesome responsibility. They have the best chance between them of putting pay to this virus. They have the resources, the medical firepower and the cash to give the best chance of getting rid of this virus and getting a handle on it. And they have made a good start. Observers would say, with this commitment of 500 million doses to be shared by America, 100 million by Britain, and in total 1 billion doses are going to be shared by the G7 countries by the end of next year. But listening to NGOs and charities who gave a briefing this afternoon, that is too little and it's too slow. They would like to see, they said,
So the German lady there, you got Macron, you got Joe Biden, Boris Johnson there, you can see. And you got it's like the Chinese president at the back. You got all the presidents there, most of them. France, England, America, Germany.
Of the summit, or just before it, he said the aim would be to vaccinate the entire world by the end of next year. Now that's 8 billion people. So that commitment of 1 billion from the 7 richest nations isn't enough, which is why observers are saying, these NGOs are saying, there's got to be more, there's got to be more effort. Talking about Britain's contribution, yes, 1 billion doses are being pledged, but only 5 million by September. And just the indications we're getting from the government at the moment is that there's not going to be any extra cash in terms of getting those doses out to the people who need them. The people we've been talking to today, aid workers, say that it's one thing to promise doses and to share those doses. It's one thing to get them to the countries that need them, but then it's a huge logistical task getting them from the depots, from the warehouses, from the airports, and out into the mountains, out into the forests, out into the fields, to those people who need them, that we've been seeing from John Sparks' work in Lesotho. That's the big challenge. So I think people are encouraged by the fact that there's been progress made, encouraged also that there does seem to be a real sort of united sense of purpose from G7 leaders here. But I think people are hoping really this is just the beginning. And if we're to avoid seeing more chilling headlines about Delta variants and others to come, more this feeling that we're sort of trapped on our own island, not able to go on holiday, there's going to need to be a lot more effort globally from particularly the world's richest nations in the months ahead.
Dominic Wacom, thank you very much indeed. Well, as we've been hearing, Boris Johnson and Joe Biden have made a promise to tackle the global pandemic at the beginning of this summit. The G7 leaders are expected to come up with 1 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines to help poorer countries stop the spread of COVID. Well, let's go to our Africa correspondent, John Sparks, who joins us from Johannesburg, having been looking at the pandemic in Lesotho. And John, as far as Africa's concerned, will these pledges coming out of the G7 be welcomed?
Yeah, they're going to be welcomed. I think that Boris Johnson, Biden, they're going to get a polite thank you, but they're going to have to do a whole lot more. And that will be the message that we've heard both in Cornwall. We're going to hear that message here on the continent of Africa as well. I think the UK, the US, developed countries now busy inoculating their entire populations are really.
As you can see, there's a light above there.
The pressure now.
That's my torch for my phone. What's the light in the bedroom as well?
Left behind here, particularly in Africa, which is now starting to struggle, starting to suffer from a third wave of infections rapidly spreading across the continent. And when you see that, you also have to realize that the levels of vaccinations on the continent are pitifully low. We're talking about 1% of the entire population here have been fully vaccinated. In South Africa, with the most advanced economy on the continent, 0.96% of the population has been fully vaccinated. And what the UK, the US, and others are doing is they're starting to address the reality and the consequences that flow from this situation. The British saying 100 million doses they're going to put up. The Americans are going to buy 500 million doses from Pfizer. Boris Johnson using grand words to describe it, a massive step to beat the pandemic for good. When you talk to people in the public health sphere here, they accuse the Prime Minister of overstatement. As we saw in Lesotho, they're still struggling to inoculate, to vaccinate frontline health workers, let alone vulnerable adults or the rest of the general public. You're looking at months and potentially years to vaccinate 60, 70% of the population in that country and around Africa. And as for Lesotho, the same goes for Africa. They're in the same boat. We've heard a lot about this COVAX UN-led vaccine sharing facility. They've only had 22 million vaccines so far. They're going to need billions. They will need billions, plural, to vaccinate all of Africa, population 1.3 billion. So these donations, these announcements, they're a start. They're a good start, but it's an emergency measure, and a whole lot more will have to be done.
John Sparks, thank you very much indeed. And Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president, is one of the participants, guest participants here at the G7 over the weekend. Earlier, I spoke to the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who's urging world leaders to focus on working together to achieve stability after the pandemic.
Some G7s end up being what I call communique summits. In other words, you issue a communique and there are warm words, but nothing much happens. This summit is really important. It's coming at a really important juncture. The announcements on vaccines are real, and that's important.
Former Prime Minister Tony Blair.
The G7 will also take action on a global surveillance system, because one of the things we need to do urgently is make sure we're picking up new variants from around the world and analyzing them fast. And we need to put in place the surveillance to do that. You know, there's a lot of work to be done for this pandemic, and then you've got a whole slew of questions about how you prepare for future pandemics. So this G7 should be, and I think it will be hopefully, as a summit of substance, where there are real and clear things being decided, and it will also probably lay the ground for the climate summit happening again in the UK later in the year.
Well, here in Cornwall, climate protesters have been demonstrating as the G7 gets underway. Devon and Cornwall police say that around 40 groups have confirmed their intention to protest during the summit. A number of others, including the Resist G7 coalition, have said that they won't liaise with the police. Sky's Dan Whitehead has this update.
Well, there have been protests taking place right across Cornwall on day one of the summit. There's been a youth climate strike down on the beach in Falmouth, but up here, just around the bay from where the summit is taking place here in St Ives, Extinction Rebellion have been holding their first day of protest. On the agenda here, of course, is climate change, as it is high on the agenda of the summit. And we can chat to one of the protesters who has joined the march. Veril, where have you come down from, Veril?
So from Stroud.
From Stroud, yeah. And just tell us why you felt it was important to join Extinction Rebellion here at the summit.
Yeah, I think one of the key points is that we're here to sound the alarm. We're here to tell the leaders of the G7 nations that we're watching them, and to take the necessary actions to combat the climate crisis. And I think it's quite important to be here because this is an important event in the run-up to COP26, and that's where most of the really, really big decisions are going to be made. And we need to get that right. If we don't get COP26 right, our chance of solving climate change is greatly reduced. So it's quite important that we're here, we're making some noise, and telling the G7 nations that we're watching them. Also, one of the important things to point out is the G7 nations are responsible for a huge proportion of the emissions, and if we can get them to sort of take the necessary actions, all the other nations can then follow accordingly as well. So yeah.
Do you think there have long been protests at every summit? We were in Paris and there were protests there and agreements were made, and a lot of people here saying that they're simply not being acted on. Do you think they listen to you?
I hope so. Yeah, I think it's quite important to be here, whether they listen to us or not, so that we sort of we have this community of people coming together and sort of making some noise. I think it's a good thing that you pointed Paris, actually, because I feel like we failed Paris. We were supposed to reduce emissions to keep it well below 1.5 degrees Celsius, but we are headed for 3 degrees according to the current policies. We've got governments, especially the G7 nations, that are still subsidizing fossil fuels. We're still destroying nature, what we have of nature. One of the other things is greenwash as well. We've got G7 nations sort of saying they're going to do stuff. They've got net zero in their plans, but they're not acting accordingly. So,
well, I mean, there's a lot of issues for them to discuss. We'll see what comes from the leaders this weekend. Mel Rodriguez, thank you for speaking to us. This is just one of 40 groups who are holding protests right across Cornwall throughout the weekend. We'll be covering them in Falmouth and elsewhere from tomorrow. Of course, 6,500 police here to ensure that these protests pass off safely. So far, they have done. Devon and Cornwall police arrested 7 people after pulling over 2 cars and finding smoke grenades and paint. But we haven't had any huge disruption. But of course, it is day one of 3 of protests.
Well, Dan Whitehead reporting. Now, the royal family are here in Cornwall in numbers for their first major joint engagement since the start of the pandemic. The Queen will attend a reception with the G7 leaders at the Eden Project this evening. Prince Charles will be there as well, along with 10 international chief executives. And before that, this morning, the Duchess of Cambridge has been visiting a school with the US First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. Well, let's bring in our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills. She's in Charleston here in Cornwall. And Rhiannon, we really are seeing the royal family on parade for this G7 in a way that perhaps they haven't at previous international summits in this country.
Yeah, it's been described by some as a real royal charm offensive, and it was announced fairly late last night just how many members of the royal family are going to come for this G7 leaders reception this evening. But of course, the star attraction is going to be Her Majesty the Queen. And I think for some people it is quite surprising. Of course, she is 95 years old. This already is going to be a very busy weekend for her. Tomorrow she marks her official birthday, and then on Sunday we know she's already going to host President Biden and the First Lady for tea at Windsor Castle. But clearly, the monarch decided that she wanted to be here in Cornwall to meet the G7 leaders, and there is no doubt that number 10 will be absolutely delighted, because it is only the UK who can really give those G7 leaders that very special occasion of meeting Britain's longest reigning monarch. And what do you say about her? Really a head of state without equal. So that photograph they're due to have this evening, I suspect, will be one that they will want to keep for many years to come. And of course, the royal family are hugely important when it comes to promoting the UK on the world stage. And yeah, Boris Johnson, of course, this week, it's all about projecting the UK as a global power. But the handshaking and the hands of friendship really started this morning when the Duchess of Cambridge joined Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, for a visit to a very small village school here in Cornwall. And really it was reflecting what is a joint interest for Kate and the First Lady, and that's focusing on early years, so the support that parents and also young children are given during those youngest of years at school, and the impact that can have in terms of their adult life and problems later on in life when it comes to things like, I don't know, addiction or family breakdown. And for the First Lady, of course, it's really important because we know that for a lot of her working career, she's been a teacher, so she's seen firsthand the impact that support can have on children and families. Of course, for the royal family today, they want to focus on the work, but we can't forget there has been a bit of trouble recently, of course, between the Sussexes over in America and the Windsors back here. And most recently, of course, Harry and Meghan have welcomed their second child. And in fact, Kate was asked about her new niece by an American journalist. Here's what she had to say.
Do you have any wishes for your new niece, Lilibet?
Oh, I wish her all the very best. I can't wait to meet her because we haven't yet met her yet. So hopefully that will be soon.
So for Kate and the rest of the royal family, it is back to work and promoting Brand Britain this evening when they meet those G7 leaders. Also a really important moment for Prince Charles as well. He's actually brought a delegation of 10 CEOs from some of the world's leading companies. They will meet up with the G7 leaders in what is going to be a first for this summit, allowing them to sit down, talk about how governments and big business can really work closely together when it comes to the climate crisis and working towards a sustainable future.
Rhiannon Mills, thank you very much indeed. Well, the royal family clearly lending their weight to Boris Johnson's government at this G7 summit, and I think it's already becoming clear that this is perhaps more important than many of the previous 45 G7 annual summits.
Like I say, guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to watch more of this, you can watch it on Sky News or any other news programme. I've done a bit of the video, so thank you for joining me. And I'll see you all in the next video. And take it easy, keep safe, peace. And thank you for joining me.